Paul Bogacs is a lecturer at Avondale College, New South Wales, and he's also a marriage and family therapist. So it's real pleasure to have you here, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you.
And quite a bit to cover today. Really important topic, talking about relationships. Such a huge topic. But let's start somewhere. And it can be really overwhelming for so many people.
And it trips a lot of people up. A lot of people come
Absolutely.
to grief with their intimate relationships.
Yeah. So, well, let's start about some misnomers about people expectations, and so many of them fall into so many different traps, and they don't need to. So, what are some of the typical problems of today that could be avoided if people were to start well?
I think one is the expectation that things will just fall into place in relationships. And I've often had people say to me, it shouldn't be such hard work. Yeah, it's like it should be easy. And if it's not easy, probably I shouldn't be in this relationship. But we know that long-term marriages actually are the result of people sticking at it, working at it hard, and trying all kinds of different things until they find a way that they actually manage the differences between them successfully. I think we in our society, we have an overemphasis on two things, romantic love and chemistry. They're the things that emphasise because they make great movies and they make great love songs.
Typical of culture.
It's the influence of our culture. There's an obsession with that. 50 years ago, people didn't expect romantic love in the way that we do today. We expect romantic love to last and last and last, and we know that what actually happens after 6 months to 2 years, it actually transitions into a companionship type love, which is deeper, which can stand the test of time, but is nowhere near as exciting. And so people have this idea that, well, if I'm not feeling a certain way, if I'm not feeling tingles up the spine all the time about you, or if I don't, it's not the right person. And what are we doing here? You know, this expression sometimes that's used, I love her, but I'm not in love with her. Okay, yeah, what does that really mean? Does it mean I'm not infatuated with her anymore? I don't have that infatuated romantic love.
It's not as if it doesn't have its place. It has its place, and it's a beautiful, but it just cannot take you all the way. In terms, in other words, it cannot take you along in a relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think what happens after commitment and people have been together for a while, it's not that romantic love is absent, but I think it comes to visit when it's encouraged to visit. So in other words, when people are intentional and they have a weekend away together, and sometimes couples can report on those weekends, this feels like we're falling in love all over again, you know, that beautiful thing. And some of that chemistry and stuff comes back for a few days when they intensely focus on each other. So it's not that there is no romantic sort of love feelings in marriage. It certainly is, but it's not the basis and the foundation of what we do in long-term committed marriages.
Yeah, and I guess another one is fear, as well as the experience of so many, because as they see it being modeled, and being modeled in a bad way, they are put off, and there's a fear, and there's almost a sense that they are educated 50-50, 50 marriages, 50% finish okay or well, and 50% just simply fail.
Divorce rates both in America and Australia are frequently misquoted and frequently actually...
That's an interesting one. I did not know this. Can you just go on that one?
Yeah, Shaunti Feldheim makes a big point of that. She believes that the divorce rate in America is well overstated, and while she wasn't familiar with Australian divorce rates, when I've done my research from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the estimate on marriages today that will end in divorce is between 32 to 42%, which is a long way down from the over half of all marriages are failing statistic that is often bandied around. So people, as you've suggested, people get the idea, well, what's the point anyway? And thus, For some people, they go, well, we'll just live together, and when we don't want to be together anymore, then we'll just go our own separate ways. But they don't realise that once you live together, you are kind of doing marriage, but you're just doing it without all the commitment stuff. And so separating from a 7 or 8 or 9 year living together experience is still awful, is still tough. And if there have been children involved and if there's property involved, there's still all that tearing apart that you get when when the marriage ends. So it doesn't actually solve the problem.
Yes. So initial block for so many, it's not easy to get over, which is people basically have a problem with just within a culture that is so over romanticize the whole thing, and who is overemphasizing a chemistry.
Yep.
And but once you go over that and somehow, and people say, so what is love? What is really love? If it is not that chemistry, if it is not that I need to be romantically loved and madly in love on a daily basis. So what is it really then?
Yeah, well, there's different models that have been put out there, because that question has been asked in poetry and by philosophers and by writers and by songwriters and movie writers. So when we look at the people who have put models together that seem to have stood the test of time and that seem to have some good science behind them, probably one of the ones that comes out very well is Robert Sternberg's model, and it's called the triangular theory of love. And in that, I think he's tried to capture the different elements of love. He says that mature love involves intimacy, commitment, and passion, all three. And that if you only have commitment and intimacy, you will have a marriage that lasts, but it won't have a lot of life and it won't have a lot of interest. If you have commitment and passion, but not intimacy, you're not going to have the friendship stuff happening that needs to happen. If you have passion and intimacy, but no commitment, then that's very volatile. You never know when that's going to end, because a person may experience that with somebody else. So all those three together, to me, make a lot of sense.
And it's not easy. And I guess it takes time, it takes commitment, it takes all of those three to make a marriage that is really, really attractive. And I guess typically in culturally for young people, what is attractive is the intimacy aspect of it, isn't it? And a commitment seems to be regarded as something that will fall into its place just by itself, and when in fact it won't. It takes hard work at the same time.
And I think it takes a conscious decision.
Yes.
And as I said before, many young people actually move in together. 70% of people in Australia currently living together before they get married. And the challenge, I think, with that is that long-term commitment till death do us part is not part of that deal. Yes, there's intimacy, in other words, emotional connectedness. There's passion, physical connection, that happens, but there's not commitment. And so it's like a three-legged stool with a leg missing. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't stand real well, and probably not a surprise then the divorce rate for people who live together before they get married is actually higher than people who choose not to live together before they get married.
Yes. Yeah, so it's getting it right is a challenge. It's a challenge, isn't it? Now, what are some of the myths about relationships? And there are so many of them, and it is really important to navigate in those. And there are quite a few. And I listened to you talk about some of those myths, and it was quite an eye-opener for me. But let's explore some of those and go maybe a little more into details about them.
Sure. Well, one of the myths is that unresolved conflicts end marriages. That's one of the myths. Another myth is that good communication fixes most things in marriage. Another myth, I'll just list all these and then we can come back to them. You can ask me more questions about them. Another myth is that chemistry is one of the main prerequisites for a good connection. And also that anger is destructive in relationships, particularly if it's reciprocal anger.
Well, let's come back to conflict. As I heard you speak on this, and you're going to expound on this, it was a kind of like a breath of fresh air for me, because I really think that's totally on the mark. I was thinking of another word as I think about conflict, and that is maybe a bit related to it, which is a transparency in marriage. In other words, what you see is what you get. And that involves conflict, doesn't it? But let's get into conflict, because many people think that as soon as you hear the word conflict, you are spooked. You just see it as a negative. But I see it more as two sides of a coin, isn't it? Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, conflict in and of itself is not bad. And because I get worried when couples never argue about anything, because there's a couple of things happening. One is there's just not enough in common, so there's nothing to argue about. Or what has happened is one person has just realised no point arguing, they've given in. And they just keep giving in. And so we've got a very unequal marriage where one person calls the shots and the other person is the peacemaker, and they just give in. And what can happen is eventually that person that's been giving all in for years finally has enough. And is resentful of that and do something that is totally uncharacteristic that we never expect them to do, and we find that the marriage ends or there's an affair or something like that, and we go, but she seemed so happy. Well, maybe she just kept believing that there was no point saying anything because she couldn't have any say in this relationship, and so for the sake of peace just kept giving in until she couldn't anymore, or until he couldn't anymore. Yeah. We know that from the research of people like John and Julie Gottman, who are probably some of the leading researchers in what makes marriages work, they found that in looking at people who did marriage well, that 69% of problems in those marriages were not solved.
Phenomenal, isn't it?
But they were managed successfully. In other words, they didn't allow those problems to erode the good stuff in their relationship. They didn't allow it to take away from what they had built, from their belief in each other. They were able to manage those problems successfully, not resolve them, but manage them in a way that was not destructive to their relationship.
And related to this is a myth of that good communication fixes everything.
Yeah, and as you heard me say today, I have sat with couples who had very clear, calm communication using I statements, using all the stuff that the books say when they've told each other they've wanted a divorce. So it needs more than communication. And what I would suggest, and what certainly comes out of the research of people like John Gottman, is that what we want in relationship is connection. We want emotional connection. We want to be securely attached to each other. And good communication is certainly part of that and helps in that. But communication on its own is not enough. We need that warmth of knowing that we are bonded and connected, that we are valued, that we are special. All of that needs to happen because I think we were created for that.
Yes, and connected to that is anger. Obviously, we need to tread carefully as far as anger is concerned, because so many kids observe their mum and dad in those modes in the anger exchange, which can go even further than that, and therefore they are put off. But not necessarily that anger is still bad, is it?
Not in and of itself.
Yes.
It is normal to get angry if your partner attacks you, and your partner might have a go at you because they're tired, because they've had a bad day, because they're pressured, because something that you do annoys them, and then you're going to fire back, and that's normal. It's what happens after that.
Yes.
And what Gottman found in his research, which was really interesting, is that the couples who get in trouble are not the couples who have those short reciprocal exchanges of anger. but rather the couples who get into an attack-defense pattern with escalation. That they're the couples that end up then using behaviours that we know are destructive.
Yeah. You mentioned Gottman, and he did a research on 640 or something like that couples and observed them over the period of 20 years. And after analyzing, he has come to quite a discovery, and even come to the point that he could predict which couples would literally stay in relationship and which one would not.
Yeah, for those who are interested, you can look at Gottman's website, gottman.com, where those studies are actually outlined. I think 7 or 8 studies where this has been shown that he has a success rate of between 90 to 94% in predicting whether or not couples will actually stay together. And he does that based on observing their communication with each other, and he looks for certain things. And if they're present, he will predict that they will divorce. If they're not, he'll predict that this couple will be together. And to get that right, over 90% of the time is pretty amazing. And it shows, I think, that the science is pretty solid behind what Gottman is talking about.
So what was his bottom line conclusion after 45 years of research?
His bottom line conclusion is that couples whose marriages last aren't necessarily more psychologically astute, they're not necessarily more intelligent, it's not because they read more books or go to more marriage counselling, but rather they're able to make sure that their conflicts and their troubles that all marriages have don't seep into their day-to-day bids for connection that they make with each other. In other words, it doesn't rupture the bond that is between them. It's almost like, okay, we have conflict over here, but that gets contained. We don't allow that to spill over and erode into everything.
Yes.
And he also found, the other important thing about Gottman's stuff is that he found that the basis of a good relationship is a darn good friendship. And that's, I think, what's often forgotten today, because we're so obsessed with chemistry, we don't realise that much of what we do in our marriage is actually what we would do with our best friend. It's at that kind of a level. And so when people can describe their partner as their best friend, they are well on the way to making sure that their marriage is going to last, when they can talk about their partner as their best friend. So their partner is somebody that they don't just share a bed with, but they want to be with, they want to tell their troubles to, they want to go and do fun things with, they want to go out and see a movie with them, they want to go out and eat together because they just enjoy their company, which is what we do with our really good friends.
As I listened to you having a presentation at Mount of our church today, one word that dominated for me was connecting. And another word that gave me a really good insight is empathy, and the mirroring in empathy, and how a couple in a real sense connect, and in real sense grow together, and in real sense bond together without not necessarily meshing, over meshing. Do you mind talking on that one?
I think you're referring to the research that's been done on mirror neurons.
Yes.
And the fact that there's some evidence to suggest that when I sit with somebody who tells me a painful story or a happy story or a sad story, that about 10% of my neurons may be actually lining up with the neurons of the person telling the story. So then I'm actually feeling some of that same emotion that the person telling the story is. And we know actually that happens. And we've all sat with people whose sadness we've been physically able to feel. Well, that's not just psychological. That's actually to do with neurobiology, and it's to do with the way that our brains are wired. So that mirror neuron system allows couples to be in empathic connection with each other. And it seems that if couples are together long enough, they can actually end up having physical similarities because their mirror neurons have lined up. They have similar actions, body language is mirrored, and the facial muscles develop and age in much the same ways. And so sometimes, you may have noticed people who've been married together for 50 years and you go, oh, they look a bit alike. Well, it's not just your imagination.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And it's shown that people who look alike like that actually have a greater level of marital satisfaction, because what it is they've really joined, they've really connected.
It's amazing how biology can mirror neurology, if you will. It's just fascinating in a way, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, for a young person who is seriously thinking of being committed for life, but is at the back of their mind, they are fearful of a failure, to help them understand what are the predictors of a failure or a divorce. What are some of those?
Well, Gottman's research found 4 specific behaviours that correlated so strongly with divorce that he actually called them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And you remember in the book of Revelation, in the Bible, it talks about 4 horsemen, and it's a prediction of the end of the world. And Gottman took this and said, well, these things... Sorry?
They are nasties.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, they're nasties. And he said, when these nasties happen, when these horses start galloping through your marriage, you're looking at the end of your marriage. So the 4 that he identified were criticism, stonewalling, contempt, and defensiveness. So those 4 things. So defensiveness means I can't take on board what you're saying, because as soon as you say something to me, I'm going to be defensive, and often that defense is also done through attack. So if you share a concern with me, then the way that I defend myself is by finding something about you to have a go at, so you don't ever feel heard. So obviously not helpful.
Yes, and criticism should not be really mistaken for an objection.
Criticism is not the same as complaint.
As
we
a
all have
complaint,
complaints,
exactly.
and we all have a right to have
Exactly.
complaints. And where we ask our partner to deal with something, would you please remember to put the toilet seat down?
Correct.
Would you remember to put the lid on the toothpaste, because I hate it when it all gets dried up.
And also complaint is not the same as nagging, is it?
It's not the same. A complaint becomes nagging when it happens again and again and again and again.
Yes.
So a complaint doesn't have to be problematic. It's what we do with that.
Yes.
Criticism is deeper than a complaint, because criticism is criticism of the person, not just a specific behaviour.
It's deeper.
It's deeper because it's criticism of the person. Somehow you were inadequate because you did that. Somehow.
It's not the action itself, a specific action that's being judged, but it's more of
it's the person.
It's more personal character that is being judged.
Yes.
So that's a predictor of a failure of a marriage. So in other words, look yourself in a mirror and look at the relationships that you have with others, not necessarily with future partner, but with anyone around you, and see if you are displaying that kind of a behavior, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which can be a predictor when you enter into a relationship that you'd like. Yeah. So defensiveness. Why is that a bad thing?
Yeah, because defensiveness means I can't hear anything. I can't adjust to feedback. We are meant to be a reciprocating system as a couple that has feedback loops, so that you can give me feedback and I can adjust behaviour. Yeah, and my partner can give me feedback, I can adjust behaviour, I can give her feedback, she can adjust behaviour, and things work better, and the system is stabilised and can work. But with defensiveness, there's no chance for feedback to be taken on board. And so adjustments to behaviour are not made.
Yes.
So the things that may actually be in and of themselves are not so big, but when they're not heard and not addressed and not listened to, then they become bigger, because then it's not just about the issue. It's also about you actually ignoring me. You actually don't care about my feelings. So a bigger issue than you don't do this thing which I've asked you to do, or I can't talk to you about this. It's about I'm not important enough to you, or you don't value me enough to take on board what I'm saying, or to listen to my request, or even validate that it's okay for me to feel the way I do, to feel upset about this, or to feel sad about this, or to feel angry at you about this.
And as far as stonewalling is concerned, is the bottom line of stonewalling is just a emotional absence?
Yeah, a total absence. I just block you out, and often done by just not speaking back to the person.
And would the worst of those four horsemen be a contempt?
Contempt is the worst, because contempt says, I don't like who you are. I don't like you. You're actually not a good person. You know, contempt is a massive put down.
And that doesn't mean that it may not cross the mind of a person, something like that. But if it is a constant...
It's the message that comes out consistently rather than the one-off. With any of these four horsemen, it's not what we do once or twice. It's what we
consistently.
It's what we do consistently that directs relationships.
Yeah. In a relationship, what? Because men and women are different, aren't they? What makes guys tick? What makes men tick? What feeds their heart and soul as far as a spouse is concerned, and means to them and is important to them?
Yeah, interesting you bring that up, because a social researcher called Shaunti Feldheim in the States was really interested in that question. What makes people happy in marriage? What makes men happy? What makes women happy? What makes for successful marriages? And so she wrote a book specifically for men and a book specifically for women, based on the interviews that she had done with the opposite gender. And then she also wrote a book called The Good News About Marriage. And that's where she actually addresses the myth of that divorce rate, and says, look, really, there's more people having fun in marriage than we make out.
Yes.
Yeah. So what she found when she interviewed a whole lot of men, and she had fairly large sample sizes, so there were large interviews. You didn't just chat to a couple of people down the local coffee shop. This was done as proper social research, using proper social research methods. And there's some things that she found out. One of them is that what makes men happy is when the effort that they put in is noticed and they receive sincere thanks. As men, we want to be thanked. We want to notice that we've done something. We've mowed the lawn, we've washed the car, we've chopped the wood, we've done whatever, and we want the significant woman in our lives to say, "Oh, good job."
So is that generally wired in the brain of a man, that he wants to kind of, it's probably a wrong word to use, to earn it. So he wants to do something, and then that something, it needs to be recognized. It seems that it comes over and over again, as if that is kind of wired into us.
To some extent, men are fixers. They want to fix things. They want to do things, and they want to be acknowledged for the actions. You don't get 2 or 3 guys standing around a friend's car going, I wonder how this car is feeling about the fact that its gearbox is leaking oil. Men don't have that sort of conversations. They immediately go, well, what are we going to do to fix it? Who's got this? Who's got a jack? Who's got tools? Let's get the socket set out. Or I've got a mate who's a mechanic. He'll rip that gearbox out. We think in those very, very practical terms. And so that's how we operate in marriage. And there's a lot of good things about that. There's also some... In the emotions, it doesn't work quite so well, but it works great if the fridge has a problem, if the hot water system is not working, if a light bulb needs replacing. We just go, okay, here, give it to me, chair up, screw it in, and problem fixed. We've got light again, and we can do that very, very well. And
even when if I cook a meal for my wife, I'd like her to say, this is a good meal.
Yep, this is a good meal. You're amazing. I'm so lucky I've got a husband who's cooked a meal, even if you only cook 1 meal a month.
Yeah, I'm a little better than that.
I'm so glad. I'll check with your wife later.
Yes. What about women?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because what women said that they wanted was quite different. Quite different. For example, they want their husband to take their hand when they're walking up the street. They want messages left by voicemail, email, or a text. just to let them know that he's thinking of it, even if he's got a really busy day. They want to show physical affection in public, obviously appropriate physical affection, but they want the man to put their arm around them lovingly, and they want to be able to show to the world, yep, that I belong to him, and don't even think about coming close to me because I've got this man who's going to protect me, and he's with me. We're together. You know, we're a team. They want to be told that they're beautiful.
Yes.
And they want to be told in a way that's genuine by the man in their life, because women often feel quite insecure because of the overemphasis that we put on outward appearance for women. You know, it's quite a double standard. Men can put on some weight, but if women do so, we go, oh, she's let herself go. You know, if men do it, we joke about it. If women do it, we start to get critical. So women have had so much pressure put on. They're very, very sensitive about how they look. And so they need the man whose opinion matters the most to them to tell them, I think you're gorgeous. I think you're beautiful. You know, still am attracted to you. Still am physically attracted to you. Women also said in this survey that they wanted men to find ways of pulling themselves out of a bad mood rather than just withdrawing, rather than just disappearing because they're in a bad mood or dumping that bad mood all over their wife. They wanted men to find ways of dealing with that. Whether that was by having a good talking to themselves, whether that's by some other self-soothing mechanism where they can contain the anger and the rage and the frustration and all of that stuff that's caused their bad mood, that they can deal with it and contain that and not dump it all over the kids or the wife, as can often happen in families.
Yes. Well, Paul, we've covered quite a lot. So intimacy, passion, commitment. It's possible to keep a balance and to move on. Yeah, well, it's been really good talking to you today. And for the young person nowadays who plans to get married and go into a commitment that is lifelong commitment, there needs to be certain kind of understanding, even education and counseling to go through, just not to make rookie and basic mistakes and pay the heavy price later on.
Yep.
What would you say to them as the last thing you would
I think
say?
Particularly with adolescents who start dating, if I could say one thing, I would say slow it down. Just slow it down. There's no need to rush. Slow down the level at which you're physical with the girlfriend or boyfriend. Keep the M word right out of it, the marriage word. Just wait till you really know each other. I think one of the big things is people think after 3 or 4 months they know each other. They haven't got a clue. They have no idea who the person is. And as young people, they're still working out who they are themselves, let alone being able to understand their partners. They need to be really aware of that.
Because it entails unpacking not much about their past, much about who they are, their pain, and what makes them tick, and going through all those issues, and doing that before marriage. It's so much better, isn't it?
Or at least starting the journey and having some awareness,
yes.
of what's going on. I think the other thing that where I think young people sometimes trip up a bit is that often family and friends who love the young person dearly will be able to see things and tries to point it out to the young person who is caught in that very addictive romantic love and doesn't want to listen. And then when it all goes pear-shaped, they often say, yeah, my family and my friends told me they didn't think this was a great idea and didn't work, and
I can see it now.
And now I can see it now that we've got 2 little kids and we're divorcing, So take notice of friends and family. Don't be totally dictated by what they say, but certainly listen to them because they love you, and they might be able to see things that you can't because of the fact that you're a little bit too close to be able to see that.
Paul, thank you very much. Appreciated what you
pleasure.
have done in our church, but also for this podcast.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.